Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Topical Hour. Injustice 2 is a fighting game that came out 6 years ago, and it's the last game before Mortal Kombat 11 and 1 that NetherRealm produced. While it is a sequel to the original Injustice Gods Among Us from 2013, the first game is more of a preamble to this game in terms of story. However, this game is an enormous downgrade from the first in the series, and it's actually kind of baffling how insulting this one is compared to the first one. Now, I'll establish that I have played both game stories and I have over 20 hours on both, and way more than that on this game specifically. But the amount of time I have in this game doesn't really have much to do with the problems. But, as I usually do with games on this channel, we'll start with the story. The original Injustice comics are fantastic stories and some of the most explored what-if scenarios in comic book history. Some of our favorite heroes turn into tyrants or are even killed for refusing to be a tyrant. It's interesting, to say the least. And obviously with video games you can only really adapt so much of a story. In Injustice 1, the writers quite clearly took a look at the Injustice story and considered what they could do, and did it. They didn't bother adapting the entire story, and rather than focusing on the Injustice universe, they told the story from the perspective of the original non-tyrant heroes. Which is cool, but in Injustice 2, we kinda ditched that and just adapt as much as we can. We don't even really see the original heroes in the second game, save for like Green Arrow and Black Canary. We focus on the Injustice universe, which is also okay in concept, but then we have to make up reasons for why we can't ask the original universe for help this time. Aside from the actual plot, which isn't fantastic but isn't really that bad, the characters are the weak part of this game. In a game where every chapter follows someone new, it leads to characters constantly falling by the wayside, along with some enemies just being in the game too much as filler. Perversely, sometimes enemies are just weirdly implemented and underutilized, with very few characters being used correctly. For example, both Atrocitus and Joker you only fight a single time in the story, whereas Bane you fight like 4 times, and Robin and Nightwing you fight like 3 times. The roster in general is poorly utilized, which I know slightly brushes gameplay, and I'll elaborate more later. But more irritating is the awful excuses to fight people in this game. Blue Beetle during the Three Kings chapter? Yeah, he's mind controlled, but instead of it being obvious like with Arrow and Canary, it's some kind of twist. In fact, like half the fights in this game come from people who are being controlled. Every fight with Deadshot, the fight with Harley at the Asylum, Supergirl is pretty much incapable of thinking for herself, more on that later. Firestorm and Swamp Thing in the World's Finest chapter. I feel like when your characters are this poorly utilized, you need to go back to the writing room. Almost every chapter feels like filler, especially when you think about what each one accomplishes. The first Batman chapter is literally telling us something we were told in the first game. Harley trips out and doesn't even stop the fear gas operation. Arrow and Canary don't even take down the society, seeing as they're the majority of who we fight the rest of the game. Flash is just fighting more society members and recruiting Lantern, which is decent, I guess. Lantern doesn't even recruit Aquaman or his army. Blue Beetle and Firestorm not only fail to restrain Superman, but Batman lets him out anyway. Cyborg and Catwoman actually accomplish the most technically with Brother Eye, so credit where credit's due. Except that all of the fights in that chapter are cheap, like fighting Bane yet again, Harley being controlled, and Grid being a reskin. Wonder Woman's chapter actually is the least important in the game. Supergirl's chapter is probably the most solid of the bunch because she finally uses all of her IQ points and gets her head straight. The Three Kings one accomplishes a lot, I guess, but it's still my least favorite. And then the finale. The story of this game, while well crafted, is poorly written and not confusing, but just boring. There's no stakes other than we need to save the world. Again. In the first game, even if it is more exaggerated and a little less real, you still felt something for every single character you played as, love or hate, except Wonder Woman. Oh, and off topic, but Brainiac is the most average villain ever in this game. I don't really care about him either way, and he's not very likable or hateable. But I think that's enough about the story, and we can get into the real issue, the gameplay. So, the gameplay in itself, as you play, is fine. I think a little too much was taken from the first game and reskinned, but this game plays very well. I think the gear system is obviously just to make more money and is a bit shameless, but it does offer something that I thought the first game lacked: grindability. I will grant, it will take you a very long time to get the best gear in the game for any character. But it's still possible, which is something I have to give credit for. By the way, this is your reminder to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. And the guild and multiverse system is decent. I like the local multiverse system as something you can do yourself to grind, and I like that the guilds are separate from that, but still encouraged. Although I think they overestimated how many people would be into it. Suggesting that you get 40 people in a single guild is asking for a bit much in such a specific game, especially when you gatekeep with level minimums and things like that. But there's nothing intrinsically wrong with either system if you're genuinely into the game, and the legendary multiverse, again, it'll take a long time to accomplish, is also kind of cool and gives an objective to work towards. That said, the actual roster of characters and the way some of them work is genuinely awful. Some of the worst I've seen in a fighting game. First of all, half of the characters suck outright. Most of them shouldn't be on the roster at all and were brought back for no reason and usually don't even have an excuse story-wise. Green Lantern, Aquaman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Batman, Superman, Supergirl, they obviously all have to be here. But here's a list of all the characters that don't belong in this game. Why is Poison Ivy here? Why is Cheetah here? Why is Firestorm here? I like Blue Beetle. Why is Atrocitus here? Why is Joker here? Why is Scarecrow here? And finally, why is Dr. Fate here? None of these characters were mentioned in the previous game besides Joker, and none of these characters belong here in the slightest. It really tells me that they were just running out of characters to include. So to prove that it's not that hard, the list of characters I gave that shouldn't be here is 7 characters. So I'll come up with 7 substitutes. 1. Plastic Man. He would play uniquely and he can't die very easily, so he would have survived the first game's events. 2. Mr. Terrific. I know he could play similarly to a few characters, but he has really unique skills that can make his gameplay dynamic. 3 is John Constantine. I like him more than Dr. Fate. His Death and Brainiac ship would hit harder, and he'd play coolly, although it might be weird to see him fight some of the other characters like Wonder Woman. 4. The Atom. I know he was DLC, but he should have been a base character. 5. Terra. We need more villains, and Deathstroke was in the last game so we could fit her in. 6. Man-Bat. He could play similar to Canary, but again, we need more villains. And he can fly. 7. Killer Croc. You could do a lot with the fact that he eats people in his moveset, and he's super strong, so he fits in. This is all to say, I feel like the creativity was really stretched in this game, especially with the music and stages too. All the music and stages in the first game, except for Themyscira, were actually really good and underappreciated. All of the stages in this game are boring, transitions or not. I'm not going to go through each one, but seriously, all the ones in this game are downgraded, like the Fortress of Solitude, Atlantis, and the Batcave, and even the new ones like Kahndaq and the Red Solar Cell are just plain boring. And again, I can't stress, there are very few good tracks in this game. I like the Menagerie, and that's it. That's all the music in this game that I like. I guess they wanted to avoid the exaggerated music and stages of the last game, but that was a huge part of the charm and why they worked. And I also think I should mention the first game isn't perfect by any stretch. Some of the roster in that game sucks, like Ares and Hawkgirl, and some of the maps, Themyscira, are equally unfun. But it is significantly more insulting in this game, where having more realism is translating to just being more boring. Even a lot of the super moves are boring, like Black Canaries, Hellboys, Banes, and Cheetahs. And I think as a final segment of the video before the conclusion, we can talk about the costumes. Wow, these costumes suck. I think the ones in the first game weren't really revolutionary, but these ones are genuinely awful. Batman's suit looks like plastic and fabric, and his mask looks a little bit weird. Black Adam's design is a little too different from the last game. Cheetah and Captain Cold look ridiculous. Joker looks like a pimp, and Bane and Deadshot look uninteresting. That's not even mentioning some of the gear in the multiverse. None of Flash's or Firestorm's gear looks good. It just looks weird and wrong, and the colors for both of them are boring or wrong. Atrocitus's eyes are usually covered, and that looks really weird. All of Lantern's gear looks the same, as does Poison Ivy's, Canary's, Bane's, and Wonder Woman's, and every single one of Cyborg's color schemes look awful. Anyway, I think you're starting to understand. It's a game that has a lot of great functioning features, but almost everything centered around the characters, which the game itself is centered around, is awful. The costume designs, the story implications, the balancing. Here's a quick side note, I will say that the balancing for the AI in this game is also really bad. Like, try to fight Wonder Woman on very hard without getting hit by her lasso. It is impossible. Same with Darkseid. If you're a certain distance from him, he will just keep using the same laser attack over and over. There is no exaggeration there. He will just keep doing it until you die. And I don't know how what I'm about to say is going to go over, but I think all of the women in this game, except for Harley Quinn and Supergirl, just kind of suck to fight. Like, I hate fighting Poison Ivy, I hate fighting Black Canary, and I hate fighting Cheetah. Harley Quinn I also hate fighting, but I actually really like the way she moves, and I think her moveset is aptly really good. And then Supergirl isn't quite as good as Harley Quinn, but she's still pretty cool too. It's kind of a weird thread that the women in this game are really hard to fight sometimes. Like, their combos are just kind of unfair in terms of AI. To some extent, even the locations that they fight at in this game bog it down really hard. And I know I've been complaining the entire video, but I should make it clear that I do not by any circumstances think that this game is bad. But it is such a distracting downgrade from the first game, even though it has more of everything. It feels a lot more generated rather than specially crafted, whereas the first game felt a lot more like a product of love for the story, and this game feels like we're literally stretching the story and scraping every little bit of this world that we can into more money. Honestly, as much as I would enjoy another DC fighting game, I don't even really want another Injustice game, because this 5.5 out of 10 game has left a bitter taste in my palate. But hey, that's just my opinion. I appreciate you making it this far, and if you enjoyed, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Or not, that's fine. Play nice, people.